Welcome everyone to another edition of the Classic Comic Archive, a series where I recap and review many of Marvel Comics' most seminal early issues. Our story for today is Avengers 4, cover dated March of 1964. This issue marks the first appearance of Captain America in the Silver Age of comics, and was written by Stan Lee, drawn by Jack Kirby, and inked by Art Simic. Our issue opens up with a striking splash page, teasing Captain America's coming entry into the Avengers. But to understand how the thought-dead hero has seemingly come back to life, we must first recount the events of last issue, in which Namor the Submariner, after having been abandoned by his partner the Hulk, fled from battle with the Avengers. From there, he resumed his long-standing search for his missing people, more details of which can be found in Fantastic Four Annual 1. What's relevant to this issue, though, is that Namor, in his unrelenting search, has found himself in the Arctic, and has stumbled onto a group of Inuits performing a strange ritual. They're praying to a petrified figure frozen in a block of ice. And although they're peacefully keeping to themselves, Namor, holding an infernal hatred for all humans, angrily picks up the block of ice and hurls it into the ocean. He then destroys the surrounding area, and sends the Inuits fleeing in terror. Some time later, the Avengers, having heard about Namor's rampage, head to the Arctic to investigate. Traveling in a special submarine designed by millionaire inventor Tony Stark, the team stumble onto a fresh corpse drifting underwater. Little do they know, but this is actually the figure frozen in the block of ice. After Namor hurled him into the ocean, he drifted to warmer waters, and the ice surrounding him melted. Perhaps out of sheer curiosity, the Avengers decide to bring him aboard their ship. Investigating his corpse, they discover that he's wearing the costume of legendary World War II hero, Captain America. Although Cap was thought to have died shortly before the war ended, it seems that if this man truly is him, then the frigid cold of the Arctic has kept his body preserved. But when the Wasp goes in for a closer look, she notices that the man's still breathing. Suddenly, the man leaps up, and begins screaming to someone called Bucky, telling him to look out. Hearing no response, he then manically tackles the three male Avengers, thinking they're his enemies from a bygone battle. But then, as if realizing that the battle's long over, and that his dear Bucky is long dead, the man stops fighting, and asks what's going on. Since the Avengers hardly know themselves, the man takes a moment to remind them of who he is, as he puts on his old mask, and declares that he's Captain America. While he certainly looks like Cap, the Avengers are skeptical, as they can't believe that after having been missing for decades, he's still as young as the day that he disappeared. So to see if he possesses Cap's legendary skills, Thor hurls his hammer at the title's claimant. Dodging it with ease, the man then lunges at Giant Man, and despite being several times smaller than him, and with no real superpowers, he manages to knock him off balance. With this incredible display of skill and grace, the Avengers accept that he's actually Captain America. Addressing their many questions, Cap explains that towards the end of World War II, he and his teenage sidekick, Bucky, were trying to stop a drone plane filled with explosives from taking off. While Cap knew that they were too late and would have to intercept it with a plane of their own, Bucky thought that he could still reach it from their motorcycle. Disregarding Cap's warnings, Bucky leaped onto the plane, and attempted to disarm the bomb on board. While Cap tried to stop him, Bucky accidentally tripped a booby trap, and the bomb exploded, killing him. While Cap survived the explosion, he was cast into frigid waters off the coast of Canada. In a strange twist of fate, his body was then frozen within a block of ice, putting him in a state of suspended animation, and thereby preventing him from aging. That brings us back to the present, as the Avengers decide to return to New York with Cap as their passenger. Yet when they reach the city pier, he decides to stay aboard the submarine for a few extra minutes. So they depart without him, and greet a swarm of reporters, eager to know what happened with Namor and the Hulk at the Rock of Gibraltar. If you're confused, watch my video on issue 3. Anyways, while the Avengers disappointingly tell them that they weren't able to capture the Hulk, they don't get a chance to tell them the much more exciting news about Captain America, as suddenly, and without explanation, they all turn to stone. Since their transformations were obscured by a blinding light, the reporters assume that the Avengers have pulled a trick to get out of answering questions. So with seemingly nothing left to cover, the reporters all leave. Yet if they'd only stayed a few minutes later, they could have captured the story of the century, as Captain America finally emerges from the submarine. But instead of being greeted with a hero's welcome, he finds the pier completely empty. That is except for the Avengers, although he assumes that they're actual statues, just with rather strange poses. Regardless, Cap, thinking he's been deserted, decides to simply explore the new world around him. Walking through New York City, he marvels at the many changes between now and 1945, such as in women's fashion, the city skyline, and everyday vehicles. At one point, he runs into a police officer who recognizes his costume, but assumes that he's an imposter. When Cap tells him he's the real deal, the officer breaks down in tears, and thanks him for returning at a time when the world really needs him. Getting directions from the officer, Cap then heads to a nearby hotel, and manages to book a room, although I'm not sure how he paid for it. Regardless, Cap then heads to bed, as apparently several decades wasn't restful enough. But he doesn't get much sleep, as thoughts of Bucky still haunt him. It even gets to the point that he starts hallucinating, as he sees a shadowy young figure approaching him. But that's no hallucination, that's actually Rick Jones, a friend of the Hulk who's worked with the Avengers before. He'd been out looking for the super team when he spotted Cap walking down the street. Since Cap was the last one to be with them, he decided to follow him and ask him what he knows about their apparent disappearance. But at first Cap ignores Rick's questions, as all he can focus on is the uncanny similarity in appearance between Rick and Bucky. But eventually he snaps out of it, and although he doesn't know what happened to the Avengers, he agrees to help Rick in finding out. Knowing that the Avengers were last seen at the city pier, and that they were being photographed that whole time, Cap and Rick somehow get a hold of some news photos, and begin analyzing them for clues. Scanning the background of one particular photo, Cap spots a man in glasses holding what looks like a gun, thinly disguised as a camera. Thinking that he might be involved in the Avengers' disappearance, Rick sends out an alert to his teen brigade, a nationwide group of young radio enthusiasts, telling them to be on the lookout for a man with black hair, dark sunglasses, and a hat. Although several leads prove bust, one eventually leads Cap to the man they're looking for. But after having been frozen in ice for so long, an adventure like this is just what Cap's been waiting for. But so eager is he to get back in action, that when he crashes into the man's room, he fails to notice a group of gunmen waiting nearby. Thus before he can even reach the cameraman, the gunmen rush in and open fire. But he blocks their bullets with his indestructible shield, and then hurls it at their weapons. Like a saw blade, it effortlessly cuts through the barrels of their guns, leaving them with nothing but their fists. Yet as Captain America's about to prove, fists alone can go a long way, as he, despite being heavily outnumbered, and with no real superpowers, quickly overwhelms the gunmen and forces them to surrender. And so now that they're out of the way, he can finally go after the man with the camera gun. After swiftly disarming him, Cap discovers that the man is not a man at all, but an alien wearing a human mask. While the gunmen all flee upon seeing its true visage, Cap hardly seems to care, as he grabs the alien by its collar, and demands to know what's going on. So the alien explains that he was once an interstellar traveler, but one day, many centuries ago, his spaceship suffered catastrophic engine failure. It eventually crashed into Earth, and became embedded in the sea floor. With no means to pull it out, the alien was forced to abandon it, and started roaming the planet in search of someone who could help him get it out. But everyone he encountered mistook him for a monster, and many attacked him. In self-defense, he used his ray gun to turn them into stone, inspiring the myth of Medusa. But as for why he turned the Avengers to stone, well, only a few days ago he was found by Namor, who offered to free his ship, but only if he turned the Avengers to stone. At this point, Cap makes a counteroffer. If the alien returns the Avengers to normal, he'll make sure that they free his ship. Accepting this deal, the alien and Cap then head to the warehouse where the Avengers are being stored, under the assumption that they're just normal statues. Once there, the alien reverses the polarity of his ray gun, and frees the Avengers from their stone prisons. Meanwhile, deep within the ocean, Namor, having learned of his plan's failure, angrily swears to keep striking until the Avengers have been destroyed. But what can he do, as he knows that even at full strength, he alone cannot defeat them? Well, he's in luck, as just then, he happens to run into a band of elite Atlantean troops, still loyal to him as their king. Thus as an evil scheme begins to hatch, let's skip forward a day, and shift focus to the Avengers, who are attempting to free the alien's ship from the bottom of the ocean. At first they send down Giant Man, to see if he can lift it out with his sheer strength. But this fails, for as hard as he strains his massive muscles, the ship doesn't even budge. So they get a bit creative, as they use a buoy, a waterproof TV camera, and Thor's hammer, to magnetically yank it out from the seafloor. While the ship's no longer trapped, the alien still has to make some repairs on it, and he'd rather make them underwater, where none can watch him. So Giant Man props it up in preparation for a takeoff, but otherwise leaves it where it is. He then returns to the surface, and starts taking off all of the oversized scuba equipment he'd been wearing. But just as he's freed himself of the cumbersome air tank, he and Captain America are suddenly flung away from a massive explosion. It came from Namor and his Atlantean warriors, there to vanquish the Avengers. His first target is Iron Man, for in the last issue he defeated the hero, albeit distracted, with a single blow. But this battle isn't as one-sided, as Iron Man uses his trusty magnetic repulsor to momentarily trap Namor in a whirling mini-tornado. But eventually the repulsor runs out of energy, and while Iron Man's just exhausted his greatest weapon, Namor is stronger than ever. Thus he well and truly pummels the hero, and since his minions are keeping the other Avengers at bay, there's no one who can save him. That is except for the Wasp, as the Atlanteans either didn't notice her, or they thought that she was too weak to bother guarding. In either case, she saves Iron Man by simply whizzing in front of Namor's eyes, momentarily blinding him. In truth, what really saves Iron Man is Thor, as he's overcome the Atlantean warriors, and is the most pressing threat. So Namor abandons his battle with Iron Man, and orders all of his minions to concentrate their fire on Thor. But the Thunder God simply deflects their laser blasts with his hammer, and sends the energy into the ground itself. Thus the Atlanteans are stung by simply standing, and are forced to disperse. So with his minions having failed, Namor goes in to take on Thor himself, and to especially steal from him his mighty hammer. But whatever came of Giant Man and Captain America? Well, the two were flung into the ocean, and while it's not yet clear what's happened to Cap, Giant Man's been trapped in an Atlantean net, and he's on the verge of drowning. But he's not in any real danger, as he simply ingests one of his shrinking pills, and then slips his now tiny body through the net. From there, he re-enlarges himself, and then saves a weary Iron Man from a swarm of Atlantean warriors. It's at this point that we learn what happened to Captain America, as he's actually been watching the battle unfold from a distance this whole time. After all, he's never seen the Avengers in battle, and he wants to know how powerful and courageous they truly are. Thus he pays special attention to the battle between Namor, Thor, and now Giant Man. He watches as Thor drops his mighty hammer, and allows Namor to attempt to pick it up. Thus the Submariner finally realizes that only Thor himself can wield it, and that even if he's separated from it, its magic enchantment means that it'll always return to him. Knowing he's on the verge of defeat, Namor pulls out the ace in his hole, as he's taken Rick Jones hostage. Perhaps fearing a repeat of what happened to Bucky, Cap finally emerges from his hiding spot, and tackles the Atlantean holding onto Rick. While Namor then seizes the old hero, before he can do anything to him, the island begins violently shaking. Assuming it's from a massive undersea earthquake, Namor orders his minions to flee back to the sea, as he's confident that the quake will destroy the island, and with it the Avengers. So he also leaves, sure that the Avengers will soon perish, but disappointed that they won't meet a more fitting end, as even he admits that they were worthy foes. Yet if he'd only stayed a little bit longer, he would have realized that the island's shaking wasn't caused by an undersea earthquake, but the alien spaceship finally taking off. Thus once it's left Earth, the island calms back down. So once again the Avengers have met Namor in battle, only for both sides to leave empty-handed. Except that's not really true, as while the Avengers weren't able to defeat Namor, they certainly aren't leaving empty-handed. Instead, they're leaving with a new member, as after he saw them in battle, and they saw him save Rick, the Avengers offer Captain America a spot on the team. He accepts, finally filling the hole that the Hulk left 2 issues ago. But speaking of, the issue subsequently ends as we see Rick sitting solemnly on some rocks. He's torn, as while he knows that Cap wants him to be his new partner, and he does too, he's worried about what the Hulk will do when he finds out. What if he thinks he's being replaced? Will he not mind and revel in finally being alone, or will he lose control and go on a rampage? That concludes Avengers 4, and another episode of the Classic Comic Archive. But as always, I would like to offer a brief review of this issue. Overall, I thought that this was a great story, definitely the best in the series so far. While the plot was kind of jumbled, and at times confusing, I have to applaud Marvel for pulling off yet another iconic and exciting first appearance, with Captain America. While he'd obviously been a well-established character for decades, they did a truly masterful job of bringing him into the modern age, or what was in 1964. While he was still the same righteous, liberty-loving hero that we all enjoy, he was also a man tormented by his past, and a man struggling to understand his place in the world. Thus, after having only made a single appearance, I think he might just be the most interesting and complex of the Avengers. My only real complaint for this issue is that once again, the Wasp was pretty useless. All she did was blind Namor for a few seconds, after which she completely disappeared from the battle. I get that she's the weakest Avenger, but they could have at least shown her fighting some of Namor's goons. But in any case, let me know what you thought of this issue and the video, and feel free to suggest other classic comics for me to cover. Thanks for watching.